أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Brothers and sisters, dear viewers around the world, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Over the last few nights and into the next few nights inshallah, we have been discussing Surah Luqman, chapter 31 in the Holy Quran, trying to extrapolate from this great chapter lessons that we can apply in our lives through contemplation and through recitation. And we've discussed verses number 1 through 5. Now we reach verse number 6, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا أولئك لهم عذاب مهين. And of mankind is he who purchases idle talks to mislead from the path of Allah without knowledge, and takes it by way of mockery. For such there will be a humiliating torment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is telling us, He's speaking about one of those obstacles that stand in the way of progress and of the perfection of the human soul and our journey to seek the nearness and proximity of God the Almighty. We mentioned in previous nights that one of the problems that mankind seems to have is we have all the factors that would help us achieve our potential, but oftentimes we fall into a trap that would hinder our progress, that would inhibit our ability to make any meaningful headway in our lives. And one of those traps is what God is referring to in this verse. He refers to it as lahwul hadith. The translation, as we said, is idle talk. Others have translated it as amusement of speech. What is idle talk? What is amusement of speech? The answer, as per the commentary and explanation of the holy household, the hadiths of the Prophet and the Ahlulbayt, is songs and music. Now that's a conversation that we need to have, brothers and sisters. Because of the sheer ubiquity of songs, because of the mind-boggling size of the music industry, because of the fact that you can almost never escape the music that's being played back everywhere all the time, we need to have a talk about music and its effects. And I don't think anyone can deny the ubiquitous nature of music. You can't go to your local supermarket without having music being played back and therefore directly affecting you and your mood and your brain. So many studies have come out from reputable, prestigious universities that talk about the detrimental effects of music. You'll always hear individuals talking about the healing power of music or the therapeutic influence that music might have on people. But there have been studies conducted at UCLA, Brigham Young University, NYU, and others, which talk about the detrimental and negative side effects of music. The reason I cite these studies isn't to talk about the harmful nature of the music industry. Just as I would rather not talk about the harmful physical side effects of alcohol in order to justify its prohibition. We do not avoid alcohol because it's bad for your liver or because it's bad for your brain, although of course that is a good demotivator, if you like. It's a good way to discourage people from drinking it. But that's not why it's prohibited in Islam. It's not why we as Muslims avoid it. But it's important to cite these studies in order to show that modern science agrees that there is a very dark and evil side to music and songs, especially the music industry as it pertains to the 21st century. And so this is a given, this is something everyone knows and acknowledges. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, there are those, مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ, those who spend money, those who give from their wealth in order to buy amusement of speech or idle talk. In other words, again, this is what the music industry is predicated on today. Without your money, without the money being spent, whether it be at the record store, the music store, or online, which is something that's increasingly the music industry transitioning into, without those billions upon billions of dollars that are paid by the average consumer buying either entire albums or individual songs, without the money being spent to buy tickets to go to concerts, without all of these things, the music industry could not survive. Musicians would not be able to make a living. And so it is because of the money, and this is a critical point that's being mentioned here in this verse. God doesn't only talk about the harmful nature of songs and music and so forth. He talks about the machinery that creates this industry. He talks about the cogs that allow this sophisticated piece of equipment to function. He talks about the money that fuels it all. And this is a very, very critical point that's made in this verse. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي. Without the consumers, without the buyers, without the concert goers, without the people fueling this, it wouldn't exist. And so this is a very critical conversation that we need to have. And inshallah, in the next 25 minutes or so, the next half an hour, the remainder of this program, inshallah, as we join you from Ahlulbayt TV studios live from London, we will be discussing this ailment and this sickness and this disease, that of music and the music industry, inshallah. We'll take a very quick break. Do join me again in just a few minutes as we discuss this critical and very important and essential topic. Thank you. See you soon in a few minutes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, brothers and sisters, it's good to be back with you discussing Surat Luqman, as we said earlier, this chapter 31 in the Holy Quran. We were talking about music and its effects. Because in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about those who spend money in order to buy idle talk or amusing talk, which has been interpreted as being songs. And God then goes on to promise torment and punishment for these individuals. And that makes it a very, very serious subject indeed. One thing that we need to start off with, I think, before we discuss the effect of music, is that Our ears are an incredibly, tremendously important sensory organ, which means that it is a way to impact us, to influence our minds and our souls, that is very, very important, to say the very least. Have you noticed how sometimes one word that someone says to you that's flattering, that's, a word of praise perhaps, a word that expresses one's love and affection, immediately makes you blush? In other words, one word that's being picked up by your ears and interpreted and processed by your brain has an immediate, instantaneous physiological impact. You immediately see the effects of that, where your cheeks turn rosy. One word. Conversely, one word, an insult perhaps, a profanity, a vulgar expression of hatred, immediately translates into a physiological phenomenon where you turn red with anger. One word. So, in short, our ears are very, very sensitive, and the things that are processed by our ears and our brains through the ears will have an immediate impact on our bodies, and therefore on our brains and our souls. And that, in a nutshell, is what makes music so detrimental, so dangerous, so unhealthy for us. As I said, studies have been conducted at major universities, including one from Brigham Young University in the United States, which talks about the overstimulation that's caused by songs and by music. It talks about the anxiety-inducing effects of music and singing. Therefore, and given the powerful influence on our bodies and our emotions, guarding this sensory organ is critical to our spiritual health. Listen to what the Quran says. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in a verse, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانُ إِلَىٰ طَعَامِهِ. Man should look at his food, the food that he consumes. Imam al-Hasan, our second Imam, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, says in a beautiful commentary on this specific verse, he says, عَجِبْتُ لِمَنْ يُفَكِّرُ فِي مَأْكُولِهِ كَيْفَ لَا يُفَكِّرُ فِي مَعْقُولِهِ. I am amazed at the one who contemplates over his food, how he fails to contemplate and think about what his mind consumes. فَيُجَنِّبُ بَطْنَهُ مَا يُؤْذِيهِ وَيُودِعُ صَدْرَهُ مَا يُرْدِيهِ. Have you noticed how if you're presented with a plate full of food, you're at a restaurant, a plate is presented to you on the table, the first thing you do is you look at the plate. God forbid there is something that's unsavory and that's that doesn't look good or doesn't look right. God forbid. Imagine if there is a strand of hair on that plate. Would you eat it? Of course not. You have every right to call the waiter back and demand to see the manager and say to the manager that this is unacceptable, this is disgusting, this is grotesque, and you either want a refund or you want them to bring you another plate. The reason we do that is because if there is a sign that the food has been mishandled, or there is a problem, or there is any issues with hygiene in that kitchen, that you have every right to object. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam says here that I'm amazed at the people who are very meticulous and careful and particular about the food they eat, which is ultimately food that's going to end up in their stomach, but fail to scrutinize the food that they will give to their brains and their minds and their chests, the Imam says, In other words, their hearts, their souls, and that's going to be consumed by their souls. عجبت لمن يفكر في مأكوله كيف لا يفكر في معقوله فيجنب بطنه ما يؤذيه ويودع صدره ما يرديه. What a beautiful articulation of this concept. Now, the commander of the faithful also has a beautiful saying in which he says, جعلوا لكل حق باطلا ولكل مستقيم مائلا. He says the idol worshippers, the disbelievers, the hypocrites, the other side, those who are trying, exerting every effort to take away our faith and our belief, they have created for every truth a falsehood, and for every straight line a deviant one. Meaning that they are working day and night to take away our faith, and yet we are happy to lend them our ears, we are happy to listen to every speaker. And that, brothers and sisters, brings me to a very important point. Again, we want to talk about music and its detrimental effect, but it's also critical that we talk about the overall concept of consuming ideas that are detrimental, that may be dangerous, that sow the seeds of doubt in our minds and ourselves. And because of that, we have so many narrations, verses in the Quran, traditions of the Ahlulbayt, which highlight the significance of scrutinizing who we listen to and what we consume using our ears, right? Because you also have this popular rhetoric out there that says, you know what? We are certain of our faith. We are confident about our beliefs. Therefore, we have no problem listening to anyone and everyone. Therefore, we are happy to engage with everyone. And that's wrong, brothers and sisters. It's wrong to say that you should be able to listen to anything. You should be able to watch any video. You should be able to... Because at the end of the day, we are not fully equipped to respond to every misconception and to every fallacy. At the end of the day, we have our shortcomings. We have our weaknesses. Yes, if you are a scholar trained in this field, in the field of religion and apologetics and responding to doubtful comments and so forth, and engaging in debates and what we call polemical discussions and discourse, there's no problem there. But not everyone is an expert in this field. And because of that, we need to be extra careful and we need to scrutinize everything that is being said. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam says in a narration, he says, "Man istama'a ila natiqin faqad abadah." This hadith is mentioned in one of our most authentic books, the book of Uyunu Akhbar al-Ridha alayhi salam by al-Shaykh al-Saduq. The Imam says that if you listen to someone, then you are worshipping the subject matter that they're talking about. فَإِنْ كَانَ النَّاطِقُ عَنِ اللَّهِ, if they're speaking of God, and speaking of God, not meaning that they talk about God in general, but if they report to you and tell you what God has said, or His messengers, or His imams, then you are worshipping God. But if they tell you not what God has said, then you are worshipping Satan himself. وَإِنْ كَانَ النَّاطِقُ عَنِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَقَدْ عَبَدَ الشَّيْطَانِ. And so, music is problematic on several fronts because of the sheer power of music to manipulate and to affect and influence us. It is problematic on several aspects. The first is music itself. In other words, the sound of music that you hear is so powerful, brothers and sisters. You know, they've actually done studies which have now been implemented over the, I guess you could say, the last few decades in industries around the world. Basically, the power of music to put you in a mindset that is akin to being intoxicated. So many influences of music resemble the effects of being inebriated and being drunk. In other words, some of the most powerful intellectual inhibitions that we have in our minds and our brains seem to loosen up when people listen to music. I mean, just think about it. Dancing is something that could almost never happen without the power of music. Without music being played, most people wouldn't dance. And the reason for that is because when music gets played, that decreases your inhibitions, it loosens you up, just like someone who is under the influence of alcohol suddenly loosens up and they start saying things that they didn't want to say and they start doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. The same thing happens when music is being played. And so people loosen up and they get up and they start moving in a manner that they wouldn't ordinarily do perhaps unless they were under the influence of music. And so that's an important point. The sounds themselves, the music itself is what affects you in a manner that is very similar to being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Keep that in mind, number one. Number two, the lyrics. Brothers and sisters, I read the lyrics of popular music and songs that are out there today. You know, Billboard's top 100, hot 100 songs, the best-selling songs. When I read the lyrics, and I don't want to encourage anyone to do that, but what I will do is I'll cite just maybe one or two examples to illustrate just how dangerous this is. Because most of the time, people listen to music as a pastime. They listen to music when they're driving down the road or when they're going to work, or they just want to keep their brains occupied. They don't really pay much attention to the lyrics, but the lyrics have very, very powerful impact on our brains. Listen to this. One musician who was interviewed, I actually didn't write the name here, but one musician says that oftentimes if we spell out the message in these songs, then radio stations wouldn't play them. This, of course, is back in the day when radio stations were the most important outlets for playing music and for getting those music tracks famous so that people would go and buy those albums. Nowadays, of course, they use the internet. I believe I read a statistic somewhere that says 86% of music consumed in the United States now is being streamed online, right? So people don't really rely on radio stations. But the point that that musician was making, that singer-songwriter, if you like, was that if we spell out the message very clearly, radio stations would censor our music and they wouldn't play them. So instead, we put them between the lines. Listen to this. Mick Jagger, a very famous rock and roll musician, someone who's still out there doing his thing, he says in an interview, in an exchange he had at a university with a reporter, I don't know if he was drunk when he said these things, because it's staggering. It's really shocking, the sorts of things he said, including the fact that he says our music is calculated to drive the kids to sex. I mean, it doesn't get more blatant than this. He says, my music is calculated to do this. And then he said, thanks to the rise of popularity in music videos, not just the music themselves, he said now the message that's embedded in the music as well as the lyrics is being played back in the form of music videos, which are so popular these days, right? You go to YouTube's top trending videos, and almost always number 1, 2, 4, 6, and 7 happen to be music videos. They are so popular. They get millions and millions of views overnight, right? And the reason for that is because you have the music itself, but then that music is translated in dancing. It's translated in overtly sexual postures. And so he says that because these music videos are now so popular and increasingly people are watching those as well as listening to the music, itself, he says, now I'm making a hell of a lot more money than I used to. Again, I'm quoting Mick Jagger. Then he says that the music we produce frees up the youth, and I'm quoting him verbatim. He said that they ought to be the youth ought to be able to do whatever they want in spite of their parents, because parents inhibit their ability to express themselves sexually and whatnot. And so music frees up the youth and encourages them to engage in whatever activity they please in spite of parental discipline and what have you. Now, I want to give you one example of the lyrics of Billy Joel, again, a popular singer, songwriter, these are the lyrics to his song, Only the Good Die Young. Just listen to what he says. Again, this is without the music, this is without all the sound effects, this is just the lyrics themselves. Tell me what you think about the immoral message that this is driving home. He says, come out, Virginia, don't let me wait. Virginia apparently is some girl he's talking to, some hypothetical. Come out, Virginia, don't let me wait. You Catholic girls start much too late. But sooner or later it comes down to fate. I might as well be the one. They say there's a heaven for those who will wait. Some say it's better, but I say it ain't. I mean, it goes against the very soul of religion, brothers and sisters. Listen to the rest. They say there's a heaven for those who wait. Some say it's better, but I say it ain't. I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. Sinners are much more fun, and only the good die young. Incredible. I mean, until you actually sit down and read it, I guess most people don't really pay much attention to what's being said if they were listening to the actual music. The point here being, brothers and sisters, the immorality that is embedded deep within the music industry. The same immorality that you find in the pornography industry. The same encouragement of sinful, illicit acts that you find in the worst possible medium is right here. And it's being perpetuated and being promoted and being purchased. People pay good money. As I said, close to $20 billion was the size of the world's music industry, and that's just direct sales we're talking about. We're not even talking about all the great fandoms that are created around these celebrities and these singers and so forth, right? The sheer amount of time in the United States, the average teenager listens to music 4 hours a day. But the amount of time they spend reading the gossip and everything to do with their favorite singers and following them on social media, the effect is compounded. But I think one of the worst aspects and the effect of the music industry and the songs is the immorality that they encourage, right? And the fact that they take away our inhibitions which are necessary to guard our souls against immorality, against sinful acts and whatnot. Let me share a few hadiths with you, inshallah, before we wrap up. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, he says, Al-qalbu haramullah, fala tuskin haramallahi ghayrallah. The heart is the sanctuary, the shrine of God. It is the sacred ground where only God resides, or He should. فَلَا تُسْكِنْ حَرَمَ اللَّهِ. Do not give the sanctuary that belongs to God to anyone other than God. By letting music consume our lives, by allowing music to exist in our homes, in our lives, in our cars, and there is a special, I guess you could say, inseparable bond between cars and a good speaker system, and therefore the ability to play back music when you're driving back from work or towards your school or what have you. Do not let anyone other than God reside in this sanctuary. Your heart is too pure. Your heart is too good for you to let these kind of people and these kinds of influences right into your heart. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says, listen to this hadith. He says, Inna Allah ba'athani rahmatan lil alameen. Many people know that the Holy Prophet is sent as a mercy to mankind. It's mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in the Hadith. I have been sent as a mercy to mankind. What else? وَلِأَمْحَقَ الْمَعَازِفَ وَالْمَزَامِيرِ, and to destroy and obliterate these musical instruments, وَأُمُورَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ, and the things that were prevalent in the time of the era of ignorance, the time of Jahiliyyah, the pre-Islamic pagan era. He says that musical instruments were used as a tool to promote Satanism, to promote immorality, to promote, and again, this isn't history, this isn't ancient history from the time before the Prophet's advent. This is right here, right now. Any music video that's out there, that's breaking the charts, watch it, listen to it. I wouldn't encourage you to do that at all. At least read the lyrics and you'll know what I'm talking about, right? وَلِأَمْحَقَ الْمَعَازِفَ وَالْمَزَامِيرِ وَأُمُورَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says in a hadith, and I quote, بَيْتُ الْغِنَاء, a house in which songs are being played, لَا تُؤْمَنُ فِيهِ الْفَجِيعَةِ. There is no guarantee that a tragedy will not take place over there. And what greater tragedy than immorality? We're not just talking about an earthquake. We're not just talking about a natural disaster. We're talking about the greatest of all tragedies, which is immorality, which is being distanced from God and driven away from God's kingdom and sanctuary. وَلَا تُجَابُ فِيهِ الدَّعْوَةِ, and no prayer is answered in a house, in a home where music is being played. وَلَا تَدْخُلُهُ الْمَلَائِكَةِ, and angels will not enter into that home. A lot of people say, we've been praying for this, that, and we're not seeing an answer. God isn't answering our prayers. Well, maybe because you have blocked yourself from being the recipient of God's mercy. Maybe because we're doing something that would stop our prayers from even reaching the heavens. And in this hadith, the Imam clearly says that music is one of those things that insulates the home. It insulates the individual. It puts you in a little bubble of yourself, and therefore you're unable to hear God or have God answer your prayer. قال رسول الله كان إبليس أول من تغنى. Iblis, meaning shaitan, was the first person to invent singing. He was the first person to sing and give rise to this medium, which in almost all cases, with some very, very minuscule and small exceptions, it is one that gives rise to immorality and sin. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says, "Al-ghina'u mimma wa'ada Allahu alayhi an-nar." Singing is one of those sins for which God has promised the hellfire and torment in the inferno. And then he recited this verse, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. There are those who buy and purchase idle talk, meaning singing and music, to mislead from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The least music does is that it's a distraction, right? It distracts you from the remembrance of God, from thinking about God, and from abstaining from the sins and transgressions against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says, "Istima'ul awtari min al-kaba'ir." Listening to musical instruments is one of the greatest sins. Listening to them. Not hearing when you're walking down the street, you hear something in the background and don't listen to it. There's a difference between listening and hearing. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, "Al-ghina'u majlisun la yanzuru Allahu ila ahlih." Singing is a gathering at which God does not look. And when God doesn't look at you, it means He does not bestow His mercy upon the individual. Imam al-Sadiq also says, "Al-ghina'u yurithu an-nifaq wa yu'qibu al-faqr." Singing creates hypocrisy. It has this tendency to make the individual a hypocrite, and it also eventually leads to poverty and being poor. The Prophet then says, "Al-ghina'u ruqyatu zina." Allahu Akbar. This hadith alone requires an entire lecture, brothers and sisters. The Prophet says that singing and listening to songs is a matter that leads to adultery and fornication. And again, there is this bond, it would seem, between songs, concerts, listening to these immoral music videos and watching them, that leads to adultery and fornication. In other words, it hypersexualizes the individual. It elevates their libido. It stimulates their desire and therefore leads to these sinful acts. Thank you, and join me again tomorrow. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.